WNBA has launched this 30th anniversary celebration, and who do they go get to be a spokesperson? One of the most toxic individuals in the history of all sports, Sheryl Swoopes.
2 minutes ago, the internet exploded again, and this time, it is the same name at the center of it all, Caitlin Clark. Because just when things started to feel like the noise was settling, another wave of controversy hit the WNBA, and once again, Sheryl Swoopes is right in the middle of the conversation. But what actually happened this time? That is where things get complicated. Because depending on who you ask, this is either a normal opinion in a growing sports debate, or something much bigger that is now dividing fans across the entire basketball world. And within minutes, social media didn't just react, it erupted. Clips started circulating. Old comments resurfaced. New reactions poured in. And suddenly, what looked like a simple discussion about a player turned into a full-scale cultural firestorm. Caitlin Clark's name? Right back at the center. Sheryl Swoopes' name? Trending all over again. And the WNBA? Once again caught in a storm it cannot seem to step away from. Because here's the question fans are now asking everywhere online. Why does it feel like every major conversation in women's basketball somehow circles back to Caitlin Clark, whether she is playing or not? And even more importantly, is this just passionate debate around a rising superstar? Or is the league now facing a deeper problem with how these narratives are being shaped in public? Because right now, the reactions are not calm. They are emotional, divided, and getting more intense by the minute. And what just surfaced is only the beginning. Because the next part of this story reveals why fans believe this situation is about to get even bigger than anyone expected. To understand why this moment has exploded the way it has, you have to step back and look at the bigger picture. Because this is not just about one comment, one video, or one reaction online. This is about a league in transition, a fan base that is rapidly changing, and a superstar who has completely shifted the attention of an entire sport. Caitlin Clark didn't just enter the WNBA quietly. She arrived like a cultural event. From her college days, she was already pulling numbers that felt unreal for women's basketball. Packed arenas followed her everywhere. Every game turned into a headline. Every shot from deep felt like a moment designed for the internet. And when she finally entered the WNBA, the expectations weren't just high. They were overwhelming. Because suddenly, the league wasn't just talking about teams, standings, or championships anymore. It was talking about her. Ticket sales shifted. TV ratings jumped. Entire arenas started selling out in cities that previously didn't see that level of attention for women's basketball. Even casual sports fans who never followed the WNBA before suddenly knew her name. And that is where everything started to change. Because when one player brings that level of attention, it doesn't just create excitement. It creates pressure inside the entire ecosystem. Veterans feel it. Analysts feel it. Media narratives shift around it. And every conversation becomes more sensitive than before. Now, in the middle of all this, you have a figure like Sheryl Swoopes, a legend of the game, a pioneer, one of the most important names in the early history of the WNBA, someone who helped build the foundation that players like Caitlin Clark are now standing on. But legends are also human, and in modern sports media, every opinion, every comment, every analysis gets amplified instantly. So when Swoopes began expressing her thoughts on Caitlin Clark during and after her rookie rise, the reaction online became divided almost immediately. Some people saw it as honest analysis from someone who has lived the game at the highest level. Others saw it as unfair criticism directed at a player who was already under a microscope every single night she stepped on the court. And that tension slowly built up over time. Because this wasn't a one-day conversation anymore. It became a pattern. Every performance was analyzed more intensely. Every highlight had a counter-discussion. Every achievement came with debate attached to it. And as Caitlin Clark's popularity kept growing, so did the intensity of the reactions around her. Fans started noticing something they felt was unusual. No matter how well she played, The conversation never fully settled. It always shifted into something else. And that is where social media stepped in. In today's sports world, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube don't just react to narratives. They shape them in real time. Clips get cut, opinions get amplified, old statements get resurfaced, and context often gets blurred in the process. So when new discussions involving Swoopes and Clark appeared again recently, it didn't take long for the internet to ignite. Not because of a single confirmed event, but because of everything leading up to it. A long history of debates, a growing fan base that feels emotionally invested, and a league that is suddenly under more attention than it has ever experienced before. The WNBA, for the first time in years, is not operating in the background anymore. It is front-page conversation. And Caitlin Clark is the biggest reason why. That is not just opinion anymore. It is visible in ratings, attendance, and media coverage across the board. But with that level of visibility comes something else. Scrutiny. Constant scrutiny. And in that environment, even normal commentary can quickly turn into controversy depending on how it is perceived, clipped, or shared online. That is exactly what makes this situation so explosive. Because now, and every discussion involving Clark doesn't stay isolated. It spreads, it trends, it escalates, and it pulls in more voices every single time. Which brings us back to the present moment, where another wave of reactions has just reignited the conversation again. And this time, the response is even louder than before. The moment this new wave of clips and reactions hits social media, everything escalates instantly. What started as another sports discussion quickly turns into a full-blown online storm, because now fans are not just reacting to basketball anymore. They are reacting to perception. And perception, in today's sports world, spreads faster than anything happening on the court. It begins with short video edits circulating across platforms. A few seconds here, a quote there, a reaction stitched together with dramatic music. And within minutes, a narrative begins forming in real time, even before anyone has fully verified what is being discussed. Caitlin Clark's name is everywhere again. Sheryl Swoopes' name is everywhere again. And the WNBA is once again trending for reasons far beyond the actual games being played. But here's where things take a turn. Because the conversation is no longer just about opinions on a player. It is about intent. And that is when the tone shifts completely. Fans begin arguing online that the pattern feels repetitive, that every major conversation about Clark somehow becomes bigger than basketball itself. Some people insist this is normal for a rising superstar. Others believe something deeper is happening in how narratives are being framed and repeated across media cycles. And that disagreement is where the conflict truly ignites. Then comes the first major twist in public perception. Old clips resurface. Not new statements, but archived interviews, commentary segments, and social media posts from previous months that suddenly get recirculated with fresh captions and emotional framing. Nothing new is officially said at this moment, but the internet behaves as if something new has happened. And that alone is enough to push everything into chaos. Because in modern sports culture, resurfaced content can feel more powerful than breaking news. And this is exactly what happens here. Comment sections explode. Fan bases split into opposing sides. One group defends Sheryl Swoopes as a legend who is simply giving honest analysis based on experience and perspective. Another group argues that the tone surrounding Caitlin Clark has been unnecessarily intense, especially given her impact on the league's growth. And somewhere in the middle, the actual basketball conversation gets completely overshadowed. That is when the first real twist hits the narrative, because a new angle begins circulating online, one that reframes the entire situation. Some fans start pointing out that Caitlin Clark isn't just being discussed as a player anymore. She is being discussed as a phenomenon that the league itself is still trying to adjust to. And that shift creates discomfort in multiple directions. Because if one player is driving record attention, record viewership, and record ticket sales, then every criticism, every comment, every reaction gets magnified beyond normal levels. Suddenly, Yes, nothing feels like just basketball anymore. Every statement becomes symbolic. Every debate becomes emotional. Every reaction becomes part of a larger story. And that is where things start spiraling further. A new set of viral posts begin comparing different eras of women's basketball. Some posts highlight how the league used to operate before Clark's arrival. Others show how dramatically attendance and attention have changed since she entered. And while these posts are often simplified or exaggerated, they fuel the emotional temperature of the conversation. Because now, the debate is not just about what was said. It is about what the league is becoming. And that is where the pressure builds. On one side, fans argue that Caitlin Clark is being held to a higher standard than most rookies in league history. On the other side, critics argue that every great player faces scrutiny and that this is simply part of professional sports. Both sides believe they are defending fairness, but neither side is slowing the conversation down. Instead, it keeps escalating. Then comes the second twist. A wave of commentary from sports analysts and former players enters the discussion, adding more fuel to the fire. Some voices defend Clark's impact and praise her for bringing unprecedented attention to the league. Others emphasize the importance of respecting legacy players and the history of the WNBA. And suddenly, what started as a player-focused discussion becomes a generational debate. Old era versus new era. Legacy versus evolution. Experience versus impact. And in the middle of all that tension, Caitlin Clark becomes the focal point of every argument without directly saying anything at all. Meanwhile, Sheryl Swoopes' name continues to trend, not because of a single new moment, but because the internet is constantly re-evaluating past commentary through a new lens. And that is what makes this situation so unstable. Because nothing is fully new, yet everything feels new when it resurfaces. The emotional temperature keeps rising. Fans are no longer calmly discussing basketball plays or stats. They are debating fairness, respect, legacy, and recognition. And once a sports conversation reaches that level, it rarely cools down quickly. But just when it seems like the narrative has stabilized into another online debate cycle, a new reaction begins forming that pushes the entire situation into even deeper controversy. And this time, the response is not just coming from fans. It is coming from inside the basketball world itself. Just when it feels like the conversation has reached its peak, the situation takes another sharp turn. Because now, this is no longer just a fan debate happening online. It is becoming a league-wide conversation that everyone seems to have an opinion on, whether directly or indirectly. And that is where things escalate fast. Clips continue circulating, but this time they are being picked up by larger sports pages, discussion shows, and commentary channels that amplify every angle of the debate. Suddenly, the discussion around Caitlin Clark is no longer contained within fan communities. It is everywhere. Morning sports shows are referencing it. Analysts are breaking it down. Former players are weighing in. And every new voice adds another layer of interpretation. Some frame it as a normal adjustment period for a generational rookie. Others frame it as a sign of deeper tension inside the league's evolving identity. But what makes this phase different is not just the commentary. It is the intensity behind it. Because every side now feels emotionally invested. And that emotional investment is what pushes everything further. Then comes the moment that shifts the entire tone again. A viral compilation begins spreading, showing various reactions, commentary segments, and game highlights stitched together with dramatic captions. The editing doesn't introduce new facts, but it changes how people feel about existing ones. And in the digital age, that is often enough, because perception moves faster than verification. And once perception takes hold, it becomes reality for many viewers. That is when the second wave of escalation hits. Fans begin pointing out contradictions in how Caitlin Clark is discussed compared to other players. Some argue she is overly scrutinized for mistakes that other rookies are rarely judged for at the same intensity. Others argue that this level of attention is simply what comes with being the most visible player in the sport. Both arguments spread rapidly. Both arguments gain traction. and neither side backs down. Then a new twist emerges. Not from a statement, but from interpretation. A segment from a sports discussion show begins circulating online where past commentary about Caitlin Clark is replayed alongside more recent praise. The contrast is what fuels the reaction, because viewers start comparing tone shifts over time. And that comparison leads to more questions than answers. Was the criticism always balanced? Was the praise always consistent? Or is the narrative changing as her influence grows? And that is where the controversy deepens further. At the same time, another layer is added when analysts begin talking about the broader impact of Caitlin Clark on the WNBA's business growth. Record attendance numbers, surging TV ratings, increased merchandise demand, and a growing international audience. These are not opinions anymore. These are visible trends. And that makes the debate even more complicated. Because now, two narratives exist at the same time. One narrative focuses on criticism, analysis, and competitive expectations. The other focuses on cultural impact, growth, and visibility. And Caitlin Clark is sitting at the intersection of both. Meanwhile, Sheryl Swoopes' role in the discussion continues to be dissected online. Not necessarily because of anything new being said, but because past comments are constantly being reevaluated in a new context. And that is where the internet adds its own fuel. Old moments are resurfaced again. Old quotes are reposted again. Old reactions are reframed again. And every time that happens, the conversation resets and escalates at the same time. Because people are no longer just reacting to what is happening now. They are reacting to everything that has happened before. Then comes another shift. A growing number of fans begin arguing that the league itself is struggling to manage how narratives around its biggest star are being perceived publicly. Some say the communication feels inconsistent, and others say the attention is unprecedented and difficult to control. But regardless of perspective, one thing becomes clear. The WNBA is now under a level of scrutiny it has never experienced before. And Caitlin Clark is at the center of it. Not by choice, but by impact. And as that realization spreads, the tension reaches another breaking point. Because what started as a debate about a player and a commentator has now expanded into something much bigger. A conversation about legacy, change, and the direction of an entire sport. And just when it seems like the noise might settle, a new wave of reactions begins forming that pushes this story into even more divisive territory, where the line between criticism, perception, and narrative becomes even harder to define. At this point, the conversation has completely broken out of its original boundaries. This is no longer a small sports debate. It is a full-scale public reaction event that is playing out in real time across every major social platform, and the intensity only keeps growing. Because the moment new clips, commentary, and reactions continue circulating, the internet doesn't slow down to verify context. It speeds up to interpret meaning. And that is where everything becomes even more explosive. Fans begin flooding comment sections under every related post, turning each clip into a battleground of opinions. One side is firmly convinced that Caitlin Clark is being unfairly targeted by constant scrutiny that no other rookie has ever faced at this level. They point to her impact, her visibility, and the undeniable change she has brought to the league in a very short time. They argue that this should be the main focus of the conversation. But the opposing side strongly disagrees. They argue that criticism is part of professional sports, regardless of popularity or impact. They insist that no player should be placed above analysis simply because they are drawing attention. And between these two extremes, the debate becomes louder, more emotional, and increasingly personal. Meanwhile, sports media platforms amplify the situation further. Short segments, reaction videos, and analysis breakdowns begin dominating feeds. And every new upload adds another layer of interpretation. Some commentators frame it as a normal growing phase for a league adjusting to unprecedented attention. Yet others frame it as a sign of deeper structural tension that the WNBA is now being forced to navigate in public view. But regardless of perspective, one thing becomes clear. This story is no longer controllable. Because once a narrative reaches this level of engagement, it takes on a life of its own. And that is exactly what is happening here. Former players also begin weighing in, adding authority and complexity to the discussion. Some emphasize the importance of respecting legacy and understanding the foundation built by earlier generations of athletes. Others highlight how rare it is for any single player to bring this level of attention and growth to the sport. And once again, both perspectives are valid, but they also deepen the divide. Because now fans are not just choosing sides in a simple debate. They are choosing sides in how they view the entire evolution of women's basketball. Social media begins reflecting that divide clearly. Hashtags trend in opposite directions. Clips are re-edited with contrasting narratives. And even neutral posts get pulled into arguments in the comments. Meanwhile, mainstream sports coverage starts treating the situation less like a controversy and more like an ongoing cultural conversation, because the numbers cannot be ignored anymore. Attendance is up, ratings are up, merchandise interest is up, and Caitlin Clark is at the center of nearly all of it. But instead of calming the conversation, that only intensifies it. Because now every discussion about her carries both statistical proof and emotional interpretation at the same time. And that combination is what keeps the story alive. But even brands and media partners begin carefully navigating how they reference the situation, aware that anything connected to it will immediately be analyzed by the public. At the same time, online communities continue revisiting past moments, adding new meaning to old clips, and building narratives that evolve by the hour. And through all of it, Caitlin Clark remains the most discussed name in the entire league. Not just for what she is doing on the court, but for what her presence represents off of it. And Sheryl Swoopes' name continues to surface in that same cycle. Not as a new development, but as part of a larger ongoing interpretation of past commentary being viewed through a present-day lens. That is what makes this situation so volatile. Because nothing is happening in isolation anymore. Everything is connected. Every clip, every reaction, every debate, all feeding into one continuous cycle of attention. And as that cycle continues, one question starts emerging more frequently across platforms. Is this simply what happens when a sport grows rapidly? Or is something fundamentally shifting in how the league is being perceived by its audience? And just when it seems like the conversation might finally stabilize, a new layer of reaction begins forming that pushes the entire narrative into even more uncertain territory, where even the interpretation of fairness itself starts becoming part of the debate. Just when it feels like the noise around this situation might finally settle down, something unexpected reignites everything all over again. Because in today's digital sports world, nothing ever really ends. It just evolves into a new version of itself. And that is exactly what happens here. A fresh wave of discussion begins spreading online, not because of a new game or a new statement, but because of how the entire situation is being perceived in hindsight. People start zooming out, looking at the bigger pattern, and asking questions that push this beyond a single controversy. Because now, fans are no longer just reacting to isolated moments involving Caitlin Clark or Sheryl Swoopes. They are connecting multiple moments together into one continuous narrative. And that narrative is becoming the real story. Some argue it is simply the natural pressure that comes with being the most talked about rookie in the league. Others believe it reflects a deeper communication gap between legacy voices and the new generation of stars shaping the future of women's basketball. But what makes this phase different is that the conversation is no longer emotional alone. It is analytical now too. People are breaking down timing, patterns, reactions across different platforms, and trying to understand why every major moment involving Caitlin Clark seems to generate a wave of interpretation far bigger than the original event itself. Then comes the twist that pushes everything into a new level of intensity. A growing number of discussions begin pointing out that the WNBA is currently experiencing a level of attention it has never seen before in its history. More viewers, more media coverage, more debate, more public scrutiny. And at the center of all of it is one name that keeps appearing again and again: Caitlin Clark. But instead of the conversation becoming unified around celebration, it becomes divided around meaning. Some say she is elevating the sport to new heights. Others say the attention is distorting how everything is being interpreted. And both sides are convinced they are seeing the truth. That is what makes this moment so unstable. Because there is no single agreed narrative anymore, only competing interpretations. And in that environment, even silence becomes loud. Even absence becomes commentary. Then a new layer enters the discussion. Fans begin questioning how modern sports media cycles shape perception in real time. How clips, reactions, and commentary can amplify certain angles while downplaying others without any intentional coordination. Not as conspiracy, but as structure, as algorithm, as engagement. And once that idea enters the conversation, it changes how everything is viewed from that point forward. Now people are not just debating what was said, they are debating how it was seen. And that is a much bigger shift. Because it means the controversy is no longer just about individuals. It is about the systems surrounding them. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark continues playing under a level of attention that remains unmatched in recent women's basketball history. Every game becomes an event. Every highlight becomes a talking point. Every reaction becomes content. And that constant visibility only adds more fuel to the ongoing discussion. Sheryl Swoopes' name continues to be part of that cycle as well. Not necessarily through new developments, but through repeated analysis of past commentary being reinterpreted in the current climate. And that is what keeps the cycle alive. Because the story is no longer linear. It is recursive. It keeps circling back on itself, and every time it does, it gains more intensity. But just when it seems like the debate might finally be stabilizing into understanding, a final question begins circulating across social media that shifts everything again. If Caitlin Clark's presence continues to reshape the league's visibility at this level, is the WNBA prepared for how much bigger this conversation can still become? Because based on everything happening so far, this doesn't feel like the end of the discussion. It feels like the beginning of something that is still unfolding, and nobody fully understands where it is heading next. And just like that, this story doesn't really end. It keeps stretching, evolving, and pulling more people into the conversation every single day. Because what we are watching here is no longer just a sports debate. It is a full cultural moment playing out in real time. On one side, you have Caitlin Clark, a player whose arrival has completely changed the visibility, energy, and global attention around the WNBA. On the other side, you have a league trying to balance legacy, respect, competition, and rapid growth all at the same time. And in the middle of it all, you have fans, analysts, and former players interpreting every moment in completely different ways. So the real question becomes simple, but also very uncomfortable. Is this just normal criticism that every rising superstar goes through? Or is this something deeper happening in how the sport, its history, and its future are being discussed in public? Because depending on who you ask, you will get a completely different answer. And that is exactly why this story refuses to die. Every new game adds fuel. Every new clip adds debate. Every new reaction brings back the same question in a slightly different form. And Caitlin Clark? She keeps playing through all of it, performing, competing, and staying at the center of attention whether the conversation is positive or negative. Meanwhile, the WNBA continues growing at a pace it has never experienced before. And every part of that growth is now tied to discussions like this one. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Caitlin Clark is being unfairly treated in these situations? Or do you think this is simply what happens when a player becomes the face of a rapidly growing league? Yes, drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those debates where nobody stays neutral for long. And if you want more deep breakdowns like this, where sports, controversy, and culture collide in real time, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next update in this story could change the entire conversation again. And remember, In modern sports, nothing stays quiet for long, especially when every single moment is being watched, analyzed, and turned into the next viral debate.